Mirrorwatch hit Overwatch servers yesterday, but beyond just the fact that it's actually a pretty exciting game mode, especially if you're a DPS or support player, there's a lot of changes that are interesting in here, and I want to kind of react to these changes as if it was a real patch and discuss some of the things that might potentially actually translate pretty well into the game. Now, this isn't necessarily a conspiracy theory that maybe that these are things that they're actually testing for the live game instead of an experimental server, but I do think that there's a couple of changes here that have promise and that are at least worth discussing, even if they don't necessarily make the live game. Overall, I want to give you guys a quick breakdown of what these abilities actually do. Whether you want to try the game mode out, that's up to you. So we'll talk with Doomfist here. We played a little bit of Doomfist, definitely not my strongest character. I think the seismic slam changes and the power block changes were the most interesting ones. Basically, this gives you overhealth to yourself and nearby allies when you do use the seismic slam. And the same thing happens with Meteor Strike when you actually land with Meteor Strike. So it's almost more like a supportive Meteor Strike. A lot of the overall tune of the Mirrorwatch is overhealth and a lot of passive support. We'll get to more of that later, but you'll notice that there's only like Zenyatta and Mercy healing and Ana healing and then Brigitte healing, and you're like, well, that's not a ton of healing. Surely healing is gonna be a bit of a problem, but actually like all the overhealth that this mode provides felt like there's actually like so much sustain, and it's gonna start with things like this. Power block was probably the most interesting thing, which basically gives this massive Reinhardt shield when Doomfist uses his power block. And it basically, it's like a Reinhardt shield that blocks damage. However, if the shield takes a certain amount of damage, it's a lot more than the original power block. It does charge your next power punch instead. This one was pretty cool. It gave you a little bit more counterplay around CC, but overall, I think Doomfist was not necessarily the most interesting character to play. Moving along onto the Reinhardt. Now, Reinhardt felt pretty bad in the game mode, just with the characters that you were playing into, and I guess, man, Reinhardt feels bad into just about everything, doesn't he? But regardless, I think his changes were maybe the most interesting out of all the tanks. So the first thing here is your barrier field actually gives you movement speed when it breaks. So once your movement, or once your shield actually fully breaks, you actually start to move around a lot faster. I actually like this one as a potential thing to bring into the game. It basically punishes you for over-focusing the Reinhardt and allows, but not necessarily just to like one-shot you, it just gives the Reinhardt more choices of what he could do when his shield is broken. And that's definitely something that we're not used to seeing in the game. Like when a Reinhardt shield is broken, the guy needs to basically be AFK, but now this adds like a little bit of a nuance, a little bit of decision on the Reinhardt side of things about like, yo, your shield is broken, but you're actually pretty lethal right now if you choose to use that. And again, it focuses you for focusing Reinhardt too much. Earth Shatter here, basically this is just equivalent of like a really, really narrow, really, really powerful Earth Shatter. Not necessarily something we need to see in game, but it's worth noting. Frenzy passive. This is another thing I actually kind of liked. Basically, doing damage with your rocket hammer increases your attack speed over time. So what this means is that the more you swing your hammer and hit something, not just hitting the air, right? You actually have to hit something, the faster and faster and faster you swing. Now, there's two reasons why this is good. The first one was with the barrier field was allowing you to move around a little bit faster if your shield is broken. But this one is actually an entirely different problem. You see, Reinhardt generally looks like the guy that should have a really, really strong frontline presence, but it's actually more his shield in the indirect value of like blocking damage and CC that gives him his frontline presence. His hammer is actually really not all that good in tank trades. Heroes like Ramattra, Orisa, Malga, Roadhog, and so on generally pretty much smoke him one-to-one, toe-to-toe. Now, this may change that, where the more that he swings on a tank, the more damage he's going to do, and it's going to start to accumulate faster and faster and faster. And this would give Ryan more of that frontline presence that he's so desperately lacking in Brawl Mirrors. And this is something that I would actually like. I think Reinhardt should overall be a lot better versus tanks. And I think that this would be a way to incorporate that without actually breaking his damage versus squishies. A really creative solution. Actually, unironically, would love to see it in game. Moving on here from Talon, Zarya. I did not like Zarya. I'm not going to lie with you guys. I only played a little bit of Zarya, so I really didn't give this one a good test. But basically, there's some changes with the way the primary fire works. First off, the fire itself is with secondary fire. I believe it goes through shields, but the big change is that the secondary fire actually goes just in a straight line. It doesn't have like an arc and a splash. I did not like this. This felt really clunky to me. Maybe it's something that you would take getting used to, but personally, I didn't love it all that much. Now, this is the other change with the bubbles. Basically, it means when the bubbles actually break, it knocks back and damages enemies when it expires. So it's a small change, nothing really crazy that I think is super necessary. Same thing happens with really both bubbles. And then Graviton Surge is just basically, Graviton Surge, which worse, it's basically a zoning tool. There's definitely some environmental kill stuff that you could do with this one, but overall just pushing enemies away is really not all that interesting. It's certainly not all that powerful. The Guishin Bastion. Now, Bastion, this one was actually a pretty interesting one. I didn't feel like it was particularly strong, but I did have a lot of fun playing this one. Again, maybe this is a mode or a hero rework that would feel better in a different circumstance. I felt kind of bad with the amount of snipers and poke damage that I was playing into. But basically, now you are a little bit faster with a powerful shotgun. So you can move around with a shotgun. And the shotgun actually felt pretty satisfying to use, if not super, super powerful. It felt more like a spammy shotgun. I'm trying to think of like what a good analogy is here. Maybe nothing off the top of my head, but basically I think like Reaper, but firing a little bit faster and maybe not quite as much damage up close. Configuration intel basically just reveals nearby enemies. It does exactly as it says, and it increases your attack and reload speed, so you just go and do things a little bit faster. I think it might increase your movement speed, but I might be wrong on that one. You might want to fact check this one. Tactical grenade, the big one here is that it just doesn't do damage to yourself. And the other thing that isn't on the patch notes here is that if you shoot the grenade directly at the floor and then jump, you actually send yourself super high, like way higher than normal. So it's not just the no damage to self. There's a secret change here that you actually launch yourself vertically really, really high, which I accidentally discovered on Dorado, which allowed me to actually access high ground on Dorado, which was crazy. Finally, the configuration reinforcement is just really silly. This one feels like a scrap PvE idea. Basically, you just launch 4 slicers that just run around and just be, honestly, annoying little rats. It's not really that interesting. It's just kind of funny. It's kind of silly. It is what it is. Overall, I think the Bastion changes have a lot of potential, especially the mobile shotgun, the increased attack reload speed, the no damage to yourself. I don't know if the mobility with Bastion would be a little bit broken with how high it could go with the verticality, but I had a lot more fun playing Bastion than I've had in a long time, even if the character didn't feel all that strong. So I think there's potentially some promise with these changes as well. Echo. This one was honestly probably the weakest of all the DPS changes. Actually, there's one more weaker. We'll get to that one in a second. This one basically allows you homing sticking bombs. It's just basically the same thing, but the sticky bombs are homing. Flight is this weird bump forward. It felt really uncomfortable. You can get verticality with it if you look up in the air, but the overall flight mobility feels a lot worse. You'll see what I mean when you get in game. Also, it does knock back and damage enemies when you hit them with flight, which is pretty silly, pretty fun, but overall more of a niche thing and not really something that complements the rest of Echo's playstyle that well. Focusing maybe the only change is that it does a slow to enemies as well, and then when you pop your ultimate, it just increases your attack speed and reduce all cooldowns. And I've been looking for an overclock ultimate for a DPS or just in general an Overwatch for a long time. Basically, that allows the character to do what they do, but do it a little bit better. I think that'd be something interesting to see, but I don't think it actually worked all that well for Echo, and it certainly messed with my muscle memory. The number of times that I go for a really aggressive play and then look for a copy and then I just die instantly because it's still me. It was kind of awkward. I didn't enjoy playing Echo all that much, but maybe you will. Sombra. Now, this one might be one of the most interesting of all the DPS changes, maybe besides Bastion. This one is basically you can now hack your teammates to increase their overhealth. You basically give them overhealth and attack speed a little bit faster. Now, you're going to have to use this one selectively, and we don't really have a lot of numbers about how long this lasts. In my testing, this did last, I would say, at least 3 or 4 seconds, I believe. So there are circumstances where it is definitely worth using. Keep in mind, it does put your hack on cooldown, though, so you need to be aware of that one. Taking damage interrupts the hack attempt just like usual. The virus change is essentially decreases the amount of damage done by the person virused. I actually don't like this change. It was fine for the fun, Overwatch thing, no big deal. But basically, I'm always a little bit skeptical of things that overall reduce the amount of damage done by the target. That always feels maybe a little bit too intrusive. I think we had that with what orb it was called. Moira had an orb that did the necrotic orb, I believe, and they ended up ditching it. Same kind of thing here. I don't think it's a very good change for the game. New antivirus, this is the ultimate, basically grants overhealth and increased attack speed to yourself and nearby allies. Like, Sombra becomes legit a tank. I think you get in around 500 HP or something like that. And basically, the more people around you, teammates around you, you give them that same amount of buff. So it's a kind of interesting, it's like a Lucio sound barrier kind of a thing, plus the attack speed. It's pretty interesting. I had a lot of fun playing Sombra just because I do enjoy the dynamics of rework Sombra. The overhealth hack on teammates was pretty fun. But overall, I think this would be something that maybe to try, but I actually was not as immediately impressed with this change as I was with the Bastion changes. Tracer, this one was just straight up broken. Basically, you have an additional blink that you can cash out whenever you have the HP for it. So if you want to use 4 blinks, even if you have literally 0 blinks, you're allowed to use blinks, but you lose, I want to say, around 50 HP for it, which is actually a pretty minor cost in a lot of circumstances. And I realized that I don't think you can actually kill yourself using this. I don't think the game will allow you to use that last blink to kill yourself, which would be a really annoying quality of life thing, but they didn't actually let you fully use the last blink to kill yourself. So you could spam the blink over and over again and never like actually fully kill yourself. So anyway, long story short, it's just a straight buff. You don't have to use it, but it is a straight buff. And then obviously the bloodthirst thing, after dealing enough continuous damage, attack speed is increased and damage steals health from enemies. This was really broken. It wasn't actually particularly hard to keep this up. You can hold it off angle with cover and pressure and pressure and pressure and pressure and pressure. If you have any sort of healing or any sort of pocket at all, you're going to get bloodthirst meter all the way up to full. And by the way, you can actually see this meter, and you're going to do a lot of damage, and you're going to be able to sustain yourself through that. Absolutely broken, very strong. I don't think either of these things really belong in the game. I think they'd just be broken. There is some value to maybe bloodthirst. If Tracer ever struggled in a meta where they're like needed more sustained DPS, then maybe this would be something to kind of keep an eye on. But I actually don't think Tracer has as much of that issue since Season 9. It's a little bit easier to land shots now. She has a little bit more consistent mid-range pressure. And also with the heal passive now, she's not as reliant on other people healing her on and off angle. She could be a little bit more self-sufficient. So indirectly, I don't think she necessarily needs this. Cool ideas, fun ideas, but certainly not something I would necessarily want to see in game. And the worst one, I hated this so much. Basically, charge shots reveal enemies with Widowmaker. This Silk Shield thing, the first game I played of Mirrorwatch, I played into a Widowmaker on Gibraltar, a pretty darn good Widowmaker. And she just sat there with shield, and it was just an awful experience. The shield is actually surprisingly tanky. I want to say it's like 500 HP or something like that. So it's not just like you can sneeze at it and it breaks. It's obnoxious. I actually think it's actually so bad. I actually think it actively hurts the fun of this silly game mode. All the other changes, there's definitely some annoying things in here to play versus, but it's all in good fun. This one was just all in bad fun. This one was just, it made me absolutely miserable playing into the character, and it almost made me want to leave the lobby when I saw that there was a Widowmaker on the enemy team, especially if the map was really bad. It's just really not fun to play into whatsoever. So do not like this one at all. And then Infrasight, I believe, if I remember correctly, it gives you an extra crit box, so you're even easier to crit during the Infrasight. So kind of a weird change that doesn't really clarify exactly what it is. But like I said, it does make you easier to crit. Ana was fun. Ana was definitely fun, and you're going to see some things here that are potentially going to make it in-game. One of those that I kind of don't think should make it is the headshot. Obviously, that's really fun. I've talked about this on stream recently. I think the danger with Ana headshotting is that you have another support character, or really just another character, period, that can headshot from a million miles away. Ana has no fall-off, right? And even if you reduce the healing multiplier, I think that you leave yourself open to having another character that can put out a lot of poke damage from a long distance. And that's something that is just, in first-person shooter games, is always risky. See what I just said about Widowmaker. The other problem with this as well is that there's a chance where if you nerf the headshot multiplier to being super weak, you actually run the risk of making it really hard to decide about whether you should go for headshots at all. It introduces this weird dynamic where like you're going to end up missing shots because you go for the headshot. Anyway, long story short, I'm not so much a big fan of this one, although I do think it's an interesting concept that we should probably discuss because, as I've said on stream, I think one of the reasons why Ana has not felt quite as good post-Season 9, one of those small reasons I think is because she can't headshot, whereas everybody else can. And if you think about a lot of the other support characters, Zenyatta's and Lucio's, those characters are headshotting a lot more often since Season 9. It is a lot easier to get headshots, and Ana hasn't really benefited from that change quite as much. Something to consider. Biotic Grenade, basically it's on a lower cooldown now. The key thing that you need to know with Biotic Grenade is that, like I said, it's on a low cooldown, but most importantly, it doesn't actually stop healing. It just reduces it. We don't actually have a percentage. I actually didn't run the test on this. There's probably a CarQ video on this already, but basically this reduces overall healing, and it's probably something that I would not be against seeing in-game. Let's put it that way. If we had Biotic Grenade not cut off healing entirely, we might actually justify being able to nerf things like Roadhog, nerf things like Malga self-sustain. You see, the reason why Biotic Grenade is probably something they need to reduce either through the tank passive or directly on the ability is because we want to not have a good argument for keeping characters like Roadhog and Malga to have the sustain that they do. Biotic Grenade is a necessary evil, but it doesn't. If we can nerf Biotic Grenade and nerf those problematic characters at the same time, then that's going to be, I think, a slightly healthier Overwatch. And I think this is a good first step with that. Nano Boost was fun. You can basically nano yourself. You do increased ally healing and reduced enemy healing when you do hit the shot. So it's kind of broken. You actually give the Bionade effect when you do shoot somebody when you're nanoed. So it's kind of interesting. I don't think this change is actually going to happen. I think being able to nano other people is too important and is just as fun as nanoing yourself. So probably not going to happen, but it is a lot of fun to use. And then the lunge, double jump. Basically, just think Hanzo, but on Ana. I don't know how I feel about this one. I like it. I think Ana has a lot of things going for her with both Bionade, Sleep Dart, long range. I don't think she necessarily needs the mobility. And I know it's crazy that I'm saying this because I'm the mobility creep guy, but I think that characters that have consistent utility, defensive tools, and range don't necessarily need the mobility. In fact, I actually think that most support characters don't really need more mobility. It's actually the tanks that I think they need more than mobility because they're more limited with the range that they have. So I would not be against this, but I do think that this would potentially cover a weakness that Ana is naturally needs to have with the amount of utility that she can provide. Brigitte, weird change. Repair pack now grants them lifesteal, and it lasts quite a long time. Again, I don't have a specific number on this one. Again, I'm sure there's a Karku video on it, but it is pretty broken. Whip shot launches your flail forward to pull an enemy closer. It's silly, especially with the barrier shield change. It actually kind of works out because, well, we'll get to that in a second. But overall, I think it's not something that we really want to see. Barrier shield, hold secondary fire to deploy a frontal energy barrier, so it's your shield. Block damage to empower shield bash. Now, I don't know the exact numbers, but I will say that it only empowered my shield bash when it was close to being broken. So almost breaking your shield is enough to empower shield bash. And if you drop your shield or if your shield is broken, I believe you keep the shield bash for when it refreshes. So you don't lose the shield bash until you use it, which is really nice. It does put fire on enemies, and it knocks back enemies when it is... when it is empowered, it does set enemies on fire, but it just it knocks back enemies with shield bash. So it was fine. I mean, there was no real complaints. It was kind of fun to use that. Brigitte was basically Brigitte, but a different whip shot, and a couple of like little juicy changes here and there. But there's nothing really here that I think I would want to see in game. The lifesteal was interesting, but I think in general, like again, it's like one of those sustain creep things that like you look at this and you're like, wow, there's a lot of like overhealth, sustain, this, that, lifesteal, and it really, you feel it in game. It's not something that I really want live. Vengeance Mercy. Did they spell vengeance wrong, or is that just how it's spelled in game? Anyway, okay, hold prime fire to heal an ally, hold secondary fire to increase an ally's damage inflicted, and deal damage to nearby enemies over time. This is kind of a weird visual effect. You'll probably notice it in game, where a target that's being damage boosted has like this like weird like Moira suck animation to anybody nearby. It is interesting. I don't know exactly what the damage numbers are, but it is pretty weak. But it does make things like damage boosting a tank a little bit more attractive because the tank is generally near somebody, so you can actually get the damage source to the enemy tank. The problem is that because it's such a weak damage source, doing that weak damage source like a half like Moira suck to an enemy tank is really not all that useful. But it made me think a little bit about like, you know, should I really be damage boosting the guy that's not going to get the damage over time because he's so far away? Like I'm damage boost the Pharah, but the Pharah's never going to get that extra damage from the right click. So it was interesting. Soul burn, detonate a fallen ally or enemy. This was pretty funny. This killed me so many times, and I killed a lot of other people with this one as well. So if you die, on your teammate dies, on your team dies, excuse me, or somebody on the enemy team dies, you can actually just detonate that soul, and it does a pretty decent amount of damage. I don't know what the actual number is, but it is enough, I believe, to one shot if you're close enough. So it's pretty significant. The ultimate, you just basically fly around and launch bombs. That's pretty much all there is. Abilities are enhanced. I haven't given a testing to see how much that affects some of the other things because pretty much every Mercy, myself included, popped Q and just freaking shot people. So we didn't really test to see how the abilities changed, but yeah, you just freaking drop bombs. Nothing here what I wanted to see go live. Maybe the soul burn thing would be kind of funny or kind of fun, but I think everything else was mostly just silly and good fun. Okay, Zenyatta. Zenyatta is so broken. I'm pretty good at Zenyatta, which definitely helped, but Zenyatta was quite broken. So Harmony Orb, basically, you can increase the amount of healing by doing more damage. Again, there's a Karku video out there, but you're going to notice this. And this was kind of interesting because this sometimes made me put Harmony Orb on my tank, which is generally not what I do, because if I dropped Harmony Orb on my tank, discorded the enemy tank, depending on the tank, me outputting damage actually bumped up my sustain on my tank to be pretty high, like way higher than 30 healing per second. So that was definitely added a little bit of nuance there, if not exactly very thoughtful nuance. Discord basically just gives damage over time. This is actually a really interesting thing. So I don't know if they changed the percentage that Discord Orb does, but the damage over time, now if you guys have seen any of my content, you know that debuffs are more effective versus larger health pools, and damage is more effective versus smaller health pools. So this introduces a little bit of nuance because you might be thinking, oh, does Discord and shoot tank the damage over time? But the damage over time is not super strong. That weak DOT becomes double in efficacy when put on a squishy. So you actually have a pretty good motivator here to put the damage or put the Discord on a squishy instead of just dropping it on a tank. And I secured a lot of kills and won a lot of 1v1s because I put Discord Orb on a squishy. Now, I don't know if this is the way that I would do it. It feels maybe a little bit broken. Maybe they'd nerf the overall Discord and leave the DOT. It could be a little bit it could be a little bit cheesy to just leave a DOT on a squishy and just basically LOS and play games with them, just slowly bleed them dry. I can imagine playing Zenyatta versus like a flanker versus Zenyatta would feel super, super annoying because you're kind of isolated. You know, the Tracer's flanking, you drop Discord Orb on her. She actually has to try and drop it quickly, otherwise she gets screwed. Maybe there's some mind games in there that would work, but this might be a little bit broken, but it's definitely an interesting concept. Ultimate Interdiction Zone. Create a field that prevents enemies from using abilities. Basically, I think it's a spot EMP. It took me a lot of time to get used to. You actually have to place it like a totem on the map, and it was weird. It was very strange, but I don't think we'll see this one in game by any means. But it was kind of fun to play with. So overall, I think there's a lot of really interesting things to see in here. Keep an eye, especially on some of the Reinhardt changes, maybe some of the details with reworking some of the things like Ana's and Yada. I had a lot of fun playing all the rules. I think the support changes were by far the most interesting to me. And let me know what you think in the comments.